Welcome to episode 1 of Roman Sunrise, the show about the show. Well, today is March 15th, 2024. It is the Ides of March. If you are unaware of the significance of this day, it was on this day in 44 BC that Julius Caesar was assassinated at a meeting of the Roman Senate. And it was a time of immense change, obviously, as there was a shift from the Roman Republic into the Roman Empire, which was exactly what they didn't want to happen. And they accidentally accelerated that through assassinating Julius Caesar and then provoking all of these civil wars, which eventually led to Imperial Rome. There are a lot of interesting parallels between the death of Julius Caesar and the death of our Lord. I might link to a little blog post that I have, which goes through some of that, but just for example, that it was in fact 77 years before the crucifixion that Caesar was put to death. The high priest of Rome, and ushering in this new age of the city of man and all of these very interesting things. And I just offer that for your own reflection and your own immersion in the world of history and its intersection with our faith. It's also a time for change in Catholic journalism. I'm going to talk today a bit about why I think that and what I'm going to do about it with this show. But first, a little bit about myself. I am a pontifical student here in Rome studying moral theology. I'm working on the doctorate now, and I'm concentrating especially on social teaching. I'll talk maybe a little bit about my particular work at another time, but I'm involved with a lot of other side pursuits in the world of academia, especially the Sixth Commandment is something which I've been particularly interested in. I'm an entrepreneur. I have various business endeavors that I'm involved with. I run my own little company in the US, Pro Fide, which you'll hear more about as time goes on. And I'm just generally, at this point, someone who has a bit of knowledge about the city of Rome, about the people of Rome, about the way things work. And so that kind of brings me to why I've decided to do this show. And I wanted to do this show years and years ago. I said, well, I'm moving to Rome. It would be great to do a podcast. Or by that point, I moved to Rome. I said, why don't I have my own show yet? And truth be told, I'm glad I waited and acquired experience in different religious houses and have gone through several stages of education and met all these different clergy and religious from all around the world and really had the experience of this city and what it has to offer. So I speak from a place of some experience. I speak from a place of some direct knowledge about things that I'll talk about. But the truth is that this isn't exactly a news show, and it's also not a theology show. I'm trying to straddle the two. I think that there is almost no balanced Catholic news these days, with the exception of CNA and a couple of other outlets like that. You don't get good Catholic news. And the reason is people want clicks. People want clicks. They want subscribers. And probably the best journalism available right now in the church, in the English-speaking world, other than CNA and those kinds of outlets, would be The Pillar. And everyone has flocked to The Pillar in the past few years because of their deep dives and their balanced coverage and the style that they present things in, which is very interesting and engaging and fair and informed. And that's sort of what I want to do with this show. This show is not about simple narratives. I'm not going to try to shock and awe you into clicking or into listening. I'm not going to try to make you panic. I'm not going to try to get you to be addicted based on fear and rumors that I've heard about evil archbishops and scheming cardinals. All of that to me is boring. I live here. I see people all the time that are relevant or newsmakers or what have you. And the truth is that we're all human beings. We're all fallen. Most of us have goodwill, basically, even if we don't always know exactly how to carry out the best thing, or even if we don't always know what the best thing to do really is. We all are sort of in it together. We all ultimately want what's best for the church and for each other, at least generally speaking, most of the time, for most people. Now, back to the pillar and CNA, and NC Register would be another standout example of good Catholic journalism. But the problem is it's typically theologically pretty thin, and I want to provide a little bit more substance there for those who want to think about problems in a deeper way, theologically and even canonically, such that you can have a serious conversation with your friends, with your colleagues, that's theologically informed. At least I want to give you some threads that you can pull on your own and, have an actual serious dialogue about things. Now, what this show is not summaries of headlines or deep dives into specifics about breaking stories. There's plenty of that. I do have a little bit of knowledge about this and that, but rarely do I have real insider info. Once in a while, I might have an interesting little scoop for you on some breaking story, but I really think that the gossip mongering in Rome is typically quite sinful, and those who stir up controversy, again, for clicks, for attention, to stroke their own ego, to make themselves feel important, or even just because they think that this is really the thing that the church needs, is more fear. Well, if that's what you're looking for, this show is not for you. You can go other places and get that. Breaking news, insider tips, all of that kind of stuff, which often turns out not to be what you thought it was. This show is not a collection of spoken theological essays read out loud. It's not theology Q&A time. If you think that that's what you need to spend your time listening to, okay, then go do that. I think that that's something which could be done. It could be done well. It could be done poorly. It could be done so-so. And it's probably worth doing to some degree, but it's not what I'm doing for a variety of reasons. This show is not about ranting about people. Again, if you want doom and gloom, the sky is falling kinds of rants, this is not a show for you. I want to be critical. I want to be challenging, but I want to be fair enough to still have the people that I personally dislike, strongly dislike, and disagree with very seriously be comfortable enough to come on this show and not be deterred by any kind of critique that I give them. I want anyone in the Catholic world who I disagree with very seriously, very strongly, and am publicly critical about, to feel comfortable enough to do an interview on air. That's the goal, while still being critical and probing and, fair, which involves pushing, but it also involves assuming generally goodwill until proven otherwise. This is not a show to just complain about how bad things are. Realism does not mean fixation on problems, and anger, while it helps to motivate justice, is not a good thing to cultivate very much of unless you are actually in a position to do something about the thing that you're angry about. It's just not worth it. It's not worth your energy. It's not worth the disturbance to your mind and your soul and your prayer. I mean, who prays more when they get really angry? Find me that person. I'd like to meet them. This is not a trad show. Disclaimer, I am a very vocal and adamant supporter of the old Mass, the old liturgies, all of it. I think it's very important. I think it's superior. I see it as an extremely important dimension of what's going on in the Western Church. I do not think it is the one thing necessary, and it's certainly not my role and my purpose on the show to do nothing but promote that and make everything about that issue. It's one issue among many. It's important, maybe very important, but it's not the thing that we need. And it's not the thing that I'm going to concentrate on with this show. So again, if that's what you're looking for, and some of you know me, and some of you know a bit about my history and all of this, if what you're looking for is insider info on trad mass stuff and critiques of Traditionis Custodes all the time, and talking all about liturgy and Novus Ordo this, trad mass that, what's going on at Trinita, whatever, no. This is not the show for you, if that's what you're looking for. This show is not for profit. This is a fully non-profit show. I am funding it in ways that are mysterious and maybe you don't need to know even. I may advertise some things, but it's not anything that's directly going to my pocket. The grand conclusion is this show is not for everyone. And in addition to all the foregoing, if you're not really already following Catholic news and you don't have some modicum of theological education above basic catechesis, you're probably going to struggle with a lot of episodes. It's the kind of pace that's just going to be a little too quick, a little too many assumptions being made about previous knowledge. You've really got to be following the news already and, have studied a bit. So that's what this show is not. So the Via Negativa is done. That's that. What this show is. This show is political in the best sense of that word. I want to figure out the best strategies to magnify Christ's kingdom on earth. Let's figure out difficult issues together. Let's talk with each other. Let's come up with strategies. What can you and I do in our lives, in our parishes, in our schools, in our towns, given what is going on, quote unquote, in the church and in your local church? What can we do? How can we organize ourselves? And so this show is political in that sense. We are organizing ourselves towards a common goal to help our flourishing as individuals and as a community. This show is intellectual. I'm an academic. I'm not the world's greatest thinker, but I do think quite a bit. And, I read this and that, and I'd like to integrate some of my education that I've spent a long time cultivating into the show. Hopefully that will be refreshing, and we won't be extremely technical usually, but it's going to be deep enough to satisfy those who are hungry for something beyond a quote from the pages of the Catechism and then maybe a passing reference to an encyclical from John Paul II. We're going to go a bit deeper than that. This show is balanced. It's a balanced show. This is the core essence of what I'm trying to do, is to be balanced and fair, to give people an opportunity to tell their side of the story, even if I have to do that in their absence. I want to take people seriously. I want to assume that they have goodwill until proven otherwise. I am personally very, very conservative in the American political sense, I guess one could say, and certainly in the theological sense. I'm a pretty strict Thomist, but I want to talk to everyone. I want to have a real conversation for the sake of truth and charity, living together in a community that we call the Catholic Church. It's about real dialogue, not fake dialogue, real dialogue. This show is Roman. We will talk a lot about Rome. I have, at this point, something close to roots here. Been here about 8 years. That's been enough time for me to learn a bit about the city, a bit about who's who. I'm not walking the halls of various dicasteries every day, vacuuming the floor for hot gossip. But, I hear things once in a while that might be prudent to share. But Rome will not be the sole focus of the show. Actually, a lot of things that go on here are quite boring, which may be disappointing to you. But the reality is that a lot of things are just not that exciting, even though they're made to sound exciting. And that goes back to the clickbait issue with Catholic journalism right now. This show is Catholic. We're not going to talk much about normal world news and politics or history. We will sometimes, but it's mostly about what's going on in the church, or has gone on in the church. The last thing is that this show is global. I have friends everywhere. One of the great benefits of having studied in Rome for 8 years now is that I have a network that is really global, and it's expanding all the time. Everywhere. Just, I have a contact, or at least a contact of a contact, and you're going to meet a lot of very interesting people from all around the world on this show. So that's what this show is and what it's not. In the end, it's an experiment, and we're going to figure it out together. I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you're listening. Please like and subscribe. Leave a comment. You have no idea how much it picks me up when people actively engage with content that I put out. Let me end this episode with a couple of thoughts about the church today and our current situation. What is really going on? This isn't the deepest dive ever. It's not the deepest take ever, and I don't confuse it for that. But here are some things to consider. I think, based on some study, that the crisis, quote unquote, in the church, which is already a bit of a misnomer, the church militant basically is a crisis. We are a crisis. We are a crisis. Original sin made humanity a crisis. And as the church militant, we are suffering together, striving for virtue together, making a lot of mistakes together in the pursuit of holiness and justice and God. But the crisis, quote unquote, as we know it and as we speak about it, is really the long arm of fights and disputes and problems and events in the mid to late 1800s. Okay, we are still reeling from the shock of 1870. And if you don't know what happened in the year 1870, that's part of the problem. The discourse has to be elevated in theology and in ecclesiology especially. In theology, but also in the way that we understand the whole church working as one. We need to go back to the 1800s. We need to understand Vatican I. We need to understand what the loss of the papal states really means, what that really is. And we need to get back to the discussion about local churches and Rome working together that was going on in the 19th century, and then was interrupted by Italian unification, and then the Industrial Revolution, and then 2 world wars, and the invention of the cell phone, the invention of the internet, another ecumenical council, 2 codes of canon law, etc., etc., etc. Here we are now, and we have to deal with it now because we have a pontificate which is driving people insane for various reasons. Not to say it's a good thing or a bad thing, it's just what's happening. What's happening is that the current pontificate is driving people insane. It's simply impossible to avoid that conclusion. It's right in front of your face. People talk about the Pope all the time. And that brings me to the next point. We don't really know what a pope is. That's the truth. That's the hard, cold, blunt truth. And if anyone tells you otherwise, they are making it up. We do not really know what a pope is. And we're finally in a position where we can kind of catch our breath a little bit. We can reflect. We have the leisure to go back to the older sources now and really consider what the papacy is and what it's not. And picking up the discussions in the 1860s again, that's the place to go. And maybe we'll do a bit of that on this show. We have a hyperactive magisterium, and this is part of what's forcing the issue of the consideration of what a pope is in himself. We have a hyperactive magisterium with, at best, a lot of very ambiguous statements that are quite troubling. This is not something that we can really do anything about as normal people, other than to pray that whatever comes out of Rome is at least decent, okay? But it's just to observe that the way that the Roman magisterium is working at the moment is extraordinarily active. It's unprecedented. It's unprecedented in the history of the Church that we have papal documents coming out at this rate, and that we have documents and homilies from other significant prelates being published all the time, instantaneously available. It's unprecedented. So again, that's not to say it's good or bad, it's to say that it is, and it's relevant. We have a highly engaged, educated, and active laity among those who are really practicing, and I'm speaking mostly about the Western world, mostly. Highly educated laity. This is also something a little bit new, and there are more lay theologians now too, which is very interesting and very different. That's not a very traditional thing, and so that's something that is a rather distinctive characteristic of the Church in the 21st century. On the other hand, we have a relatively uneducated clergy. There are some brilliant priests. I know plenty. And in the USA, we actually have a pretty strong seminary system. I know a lot of people think that it's bad, but that's because they don't get out enough. The truth is that the ecclesiastical education system globally is not particularly strong. And you have guys getting ordained who basically hardly know their left hand from their right. And that's kind of terrifying. It's simply a problem. This one isn't not good or bad. This one is bad. This is a bad thing. And it's something that maybe we'll talk about more in depth another time, but the simple fact is that we have swaths of clergy who really are not well educated. And that's a problem. we are leaving what I would call the age of the missionary, and we're entering into the age of the movements, lay movements and clerical movements. I like to think of the church in terms of ages, not just the theological ages of the church, which maybe some people are familiar with. I think of the church in terms of the apostolic age, up to the death of John the Apostle, and then sort of the monastic and patristic age, up to around Bernard of Clairvaux, and then you have the age of Christendom, and that goes up until around 1400 or so. And then you have the age of the missions, the age of the missionary. So after Christendom, along with the mendicants, the rise of the mendicant orders, the Franciscans and Dominicans, you sort of come into the Renaissance and the discovery of the New World, right? And the missions start going, right? And that's been going on now for 500 or so years. It really sort of starts to wind down with Pius XI, who was the great modern missionary pope, invented Vatican Radio, was a massive proponent of the missions. Anyway, that moment is kind of over. That's not to say we don't need missionaries. It's not to say that there aren't places where essentially the gospel's never been preached. And it's certainly not to say that, missionaries don't exist. Obviously they do. It is to say that the way that the church turns and moves is changing. And that change, I think, is shifting towards movements, lay movements, clerical movements, these little groups that gain a lot of energy and momentum, like the neo-catechumenal way. And I know there are opinions, but it's to point out that this is the kind of thing that's gaining traction, for good or for ill. It just is the way things are right now. Clerical movements, lay movements, communion and liberation, another great example, right? CL. This is what's happening. I really think that understanding this phenomenon and embracing it for all of the good that it has and helping to shape it, to prune it and make it really flourish and do whatever it's supposed to do under the auspices of God's wisdom and providence, that's something that we need to start having a serious conversation about. We have a very, very large number of people, mostly in the West, or I should say it's especially notable in the West. It's not unique to the West. It's especially notable and I suppose dissonant in the West. People who I would say are neo-Pharisees. And I would say that they're neo-Pharisees because, like the Pharisees, they will claim a title or an adjective. And they'll say, I'm a Catholic, but... And somehow they think that, because their grandmother used to pray in a church, or they show up to Mass on Easter Sunday, maybe, or maybe they carry a rosary around or whatever. And they think that this kind of heritage and culture and tradition and outward custom is somehow going to save them. It somehow constitutes the very essence of the thing which they are identifying themselves with. And it doesn't. It doesn't. A label does not save you. Christ saves you if he wants to. If you love him, when you die, he will save you. It has nothing to do with a label. It has everything to do with faith, hope, and charity, which is manifested through living out the commandments and the precepts of the church, going to confession, going to Mass, etc., etc., etc. Loving the people in your life who are really annoying. And this is a phenomenon which I hope we can dissect in some depth in the next months and years. I'm happy that you're here with us. Next week, I hope to have on a friend to talk about the station churches, which is not only something which happens in Lent, and you'll hear all about that soon. Thanks, and God bless you.